Begin. There isn't a day that goes by, whether or not you read The Economist or you read the Financial Post or just a local newspaper, where someone isn't making some comment about the changing nature of work and artificial intelligence or machine learning, or post-COVID and the changing nature of the workplace, whether or not you're working from home, your car, your cottage, wherever it may well be. It seems to be changes the nature of work and the workplace. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So welcome. Jacquie Clarke will be moderating the session, and the first presenter will be Margaret Braun. And other than that, use your chat button to pose questions or make comments, and I'll filter them and then pass them on to the group. So without further ado, welcome. Jacquie?
Welcome. I'm going to share my screen on behalf of Margaret as she talks. So just give me a moment to share screen. And as Perry has said, go ahead and ask your questions in the chat. We'll give Margaret about 20 or 25 minutes, and I'll get you to introduce yourself, Margaret. And without any further ado, over to you. Do you see my screen the way that you want?
Looks perfect.
Okay.
Oops, hold on, just give me a second. Oh. Something happened.
While she's preparing, I don't know the...
There we are.
Okay, go ahead.
You'd like me to introduce myself first?
Sure, go ahead, Margaret.
Okay. My name is Margaret Braun. I'm an HR consultant, and I work for HR Covered, who is located in Ontario. We deal with small to medium-sized organizations providing HR services all across Canada, except for Quebec. My background is in human resources, a generalist perspective. I've worked in global companies as I started my career out over 20 years ago in hospitality, manufacturing, those types of areas. Last 2 years, 2 or 3 years, I've had my own consulting firm, and I've mainly been catering to the small to medium-sized organization who are entrepreneurs, not-for-profits, or just small organizations. I have a degree in human resources and a master's degree in education with a specialty in leadership development. So one fascinating thing is that I was just telling the folks before I came on, this is the #1 topic that I get asked by clients probably since January, hoping that they think that I have a roadmap for them. And I kind of bring everybody back to reality that we've got essential service people and organizations who've been doing this for 18 months. So, I mean, now it's our turn as white collar people or office people to start moving into the direction that the essential services organizations have been doing for a while. Okay, so what's next? The pandemic is not over. I wish I could say it was, but it's not. But the recovery is beginning. It has been unprecedented over the 18 months that we've been in. Everything has changed. Our minds have changed, our hearts have changed, and the workplace has changed. And for many industries, lockdowns now are starting to go away. I deal with organizations all across Canada, and I'm telling you, each province is so different. There's no federal regulations that deal with this. I mean, Ontario is different than BC. BC is different than Alberta, and on and on and on. So where do we even start? So what I wanted to do today is kind of look at 3 key things that are kind of percolating up since the office environment is starting to get back into the workforce. Now, I know from a business perspective, it's also key. I mean, from a business perspective, it's important to consider before you start bringing people back into the office, what sector are you in? What industry are you in? How have you managed in the last 18 months? Did you pivot or did you stay the same? Do you have a physical office? Has that physical office been empty for the last 18 months? Do you not have a physical office? Are you leasing? Is your lease due? All those types of business questions I keep getting asked. I mean, many of my clients are saying, I've had an office and I'm paying rent for the last 18 months. I need to get my people back because I'm losing money on that. Today, I'm going to focus more on the people side of the issue. Like I said, 3 things. We're going to talk about the workplace because it's changed. We're also going to talk about something that economists and thought leaders are starting to raise our attention to. And it's called employee resignation. They're calling it the Great Resignation. And I'm going to speak to that because this is very important for business owners. And the last thing I'm going to speak to is what can HR do about managing all these things? How does HR come into it? How can we be different? What are we going to do that's different? Okay, Jackie, let's move to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the workplace. I remember 18 months ago, I was living in Toronto in some high rise and I was sent home because of COVID. And they said, just work from home. So I'm in a small little condo apartment. It's probably 650 square feet. I look over there, my bedroom's over there, and I put my laptop on my kitchen table and I thought, oh, this will do for a while, no problem. Well, I got really tired because I had to move the laptop over to have supper and do all that because I thought this was only going to last for a couple of weeks. Well, here we are 18 months later. So probably the workplace landscape has changed the most. Never before have so many people been allowed to work at home. In some organizations, that was considered a perk, not a mandatory thing. And so it's shifted things. So there are many views on this issue as far as the workplace goes. So what I'd like to start with first, the first point is that when you pivoted to remote work, what worked and what didn't? So sit back, what did people start working from home and what were some of the concerns? Like I remember, like I said, everybody thought this was only going to be for a few weeks. So then it turned out it wasn't. Then I learned from clients, they go, do I pay these people for their office equipment, number one. Number two, do I pay for their Wi-Fi? So it started to get all that kind of stuff. So what worked and what didn't work. Also, employers worldwide have already begun making decisions about bringing people back. Some organizations are starting to revise how they're doing the inside, how they're going to structure the inside organization. I know some of the tech companies who recruit people basically on their environment. So they have slides, they have, the dogs come in, all that kind of stuff. And that's how they brand themselves. Well, they haven't been able to do that for 18 months. So it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to rebrand themselves and how they're going to look at what the place is going to be looking like. One of the big issues and topics coming up right now is called the hybrid work model. I'm going to talk quite a bit about this with some stats later on in the presentation. The hybrid model is attractive to both employees and companies, probably more so to employees than companies, but both. What hybrid means, and I'm going to go into the pros and cons of that a little bit later, is you work in the office and you work at home. Now, there are some thought leaders who don't think it's a perfect solution because there's some challenges with that, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. One other thing that is really key if you're bringing people back into the office is the culture. What was your culture before? What was your culture during COVID? And now what is your culture going to be like going back? Many organizations are going to have to rethink how they are going to create their culture or even redesign it. Okay, next one, Jackie, please. All right, so the comparison of the different work models. We have remote work, which means you work from home. We have the full-time office work, which means you work in the office. And we have the hybrid model. So what I'd like to do a little bit is talk about what are the pros, what are the cons, and who's it best suited for. So the remote work, it's working from home. And the pros are it's cost efficient. It's flexible for work hours. You don't have to commute. I mean, if you live in a big city, you don't have to commute. You don't have to pay for parking, that type of stuff. The cons of that, it's actually very difficult disconnecting from the office. There's been a lot of newspaper articles that are saying with people working remote over the last 18 months, it's very hard to disconnect yourself. So even though if I work a 9-to-5 job, I'm on there in the evening. So there's been some talk about people are being burned out about that. So who is this best for, remote work? It's best for those with a long commute, personal responsibilities. So I have childcare. I mean, there were lots of schools that closed down and that benefit from a flexible work schedule. Those are the 3 key ones. Full-time office work. It's funny when I speak to some of my colleagues and we talk about these 3 models, some of them say, I don't ever want to go back. And some of them say, I want a hybrid. And then some of them say, I want to go back because I can't stand working at home anymore. So it's really funny. So the full-time office work, everyone works in one workplace, okay? The pros, you get a lot of collaboration, you get a lot of teamwork. It's fast and easy communication. You kind of know what's going on, you know, the water cooler, the buzz. The cons, it can be quite costly and can hamper focus, right? And things of that nature. It's best for employees with a short daily commute and enjoy workplace culture. And they don't require workday accommodations. It's very difficult for a lot of single moms or childcare providers. Hybrid, it's a combination of the 2. And when I say a combination of the 2, there are some organizations who say you come into the office 3 days, you can work at home 2 days. That's hybrid. There are also some organizations that are looking at doing, you can come into the office for 4 hours a day, and then you can work at home 4 hours a day. So it's a combination of all of those. The pro is it's a lower isolation or remote work. One of the biggest things that has come up is the loneliness and mental health for people who are working remote. Cons, it may cause issues with space and concentration. So that could be an issue. It's best for employees who want flexibility as well as collaboration, communication, and culture of a office setting. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the hybrid as we're going to get into it. What is key here is there is no right or wrong in how you're going to do this. It's really a matter of determining what is your need and the best way to process and go forward. Okay, Jackie. All right, I'm going to give you some stats. Some of these actually surprised me. So one big thing that I'm going to be sharing with you is the information from economists, thought leaders, and surveys that have been done asking employees on what they want. And this is the first time because usually we don't ask employees, do you want to work at home? Do you want to work here? But there's been all this research and surveys that are actually focusing on that. And what I was sharing with the panel initially is that when I share this with my clients, they don't believe it. And I think that it's really key that a lot of leaders start looking at this information in the newspapers or whatever, because your employees are looking at this, okay? So 4 out of 5 employees don't want to go back to their pre-pandemic schedule. 4 out of 5. 35% say they'd quit their job if their employee had their work on site. Unreal. In May, I'm just going to look down here, Leger did a survey with Association for Canada, and they also suggested that 35% are still working from home, also say they quit their job. Sorry, I just told you that. KPMG released results of a workplace survey of more than 2,000 Canadians, which showed 77% of those polled want the option of both remote and in the office after the pandemic. This study also found 5 employees said they want some kind of return to the physical office. 2/3 of the respondents said they were satisfied with their current work from home setup. Also in the KPMG survey, they expressed concern, and this is important if you're a leader and you're deciding what direction to go. They also expressed a high level of the respondents who answered this survey said their bosses and their organizational leaders are not equipped to manage the so-called hybrid workplace model, since they did not do a good job during the pandemic. So regardless of any result, the one point's very important, and it's the wish to have employees have a say in your organization, or at least listen to them on the direction you wish to take. Okay, Jackie. So 82%, this is from McKinsey, 82% gave positive reviews to their work from home experience. 40% said they'd mix of days at home and in the office. This one is key. 50% wouldn't feel comfortable returning to work if some of their coworkers were unvaccinated. You have no idea how often I get this question asked. And this is very, very prevalent regardless of what industry you're in, what sector, or how big your organization is. It's big. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so employees, there's some research also, employees are looking at their employer to get them back to the office safely. So here are some things employers might want to consider when workers start returning home. First thing, or back to the office, first things first, always follow the local public health protocols, the provincial protocols, and the federal protocols. They are completely different in every province. I'm in Ontario and we're still wearing masks. I mean, just last week, I was able to make an appointment to get my hair cut. The majority of the people in Ontario are still working at home, which my clients in Alberta and BC is completely different. Always follow the protocols, and those protocols change quickly. The other thing is to safeguard employees' well-being and safety and paramount. They want you to bring them back safely, and you have a legal liability to do that. So that's also key. And the last one is make sure that you're planning out all kinds of scenarios on your return back into the office, because one may not work. You may have to go back to doing something different. So make a whole bunch of scenarios. Remember when the COVID just started and we had essential workers only working in essential organizations? They were changing all the time. So why would we be any different as we're bringing employees back into the office? And as I mentioned before, oh, sorry, I'm running behind, I think, so I'll pick it up.
Don't worry.
Okay. So let's see, let's go to the Harvard Business Review. There we are. Okay, so Harvard Business Review, what their suggestions are for leaders is leadership puts structures in place to ensure that when you bring people back into the office, it's FaceTime, okay? It's not working at home where you don't see anybody, you're doing Zoom calls or team calls. You've got to get FaceTime, and that encourages collaboration. And then make sure that you're creating time for random connection and personal discussions. So it all has to do with socialization. That's what Harvard Business Review is saying. They're also promoting hybrid models. That's their opinion. The other thing is that when they are working at home, the employees, the big thing now is to help relay some of that loneliness. So that is why Harvard Business Review is suggesting that when they come into the office, there's a lot of socialization, of course, social distancing and all that kind of stuff. Okay, Jackie, let's go to 10. So employees, again, more stats here. More than 25% said that they would consider switching employers if the organization returns to fully on-site. That's a bit scary. This is a McKinsey study. 50% of employees want to work from home. Again, and I'm repeatedly saying this 3 days a week. They want clear vision. They want an understanding of policies, as last year has made them unsettled. And they want a mental health focus. Employers appear to be responding. This one I see more of. Compensation really is coming up big because some people didn't get bonuses last year or things of that nature. The other thing that is coming up is that if I work remote, if I'm allowed to work remote, but my colleague works in the office, am I going to still be considered for promotions and stuff? So which brings it to a two-tier system. So that's really coming out. So just slide 11, Jackie. So the second thing is the Great Resignation. This is what economists are calling it and thought leaders. 70 million workers may need to change occupations by 2030. That's unreal. I mean, just unreal. Why this is really taking a, coming into the media and things is it's because that during the pandemic, people's minds and hearts have changed. And I'm going to talk about the Canadian resignations coming up. So why they're thinking this is going to happen is you have to be reskilled, trends in remote work, change in priorities, relocation, not wanting the old terms anymore, don't want to work in the office, realizing they can take care of their skills elsewhere, and feeling betrayed. This is a big one I hear, feeling betrayed by how they were treated during COVID. Okay. Now this is scary. Labor and workforce experts have predicted a post-pandemic resignation boom. So the trend data for 21 shows that resignation rates have already begun to climb and signaling even a more pronounced increase this year than previous years. 130,000 people left their jobs last year, not because they were laid off, because they quit. And everybody thinks, well, maybe that's just because they're service workers or things of that nature. Not at all. It's going into mid-careers and also executives who kind of said, I've had enough. I was thinking of retiring maybe in 5 years, but I'm retiring now. That may lead to a labor shortage. So this is something you have to think about. Okay, let's go to the next one. Thank you. So how do you address this great resignation? Here are some ways to deal with the issue. First of all, consider the employee experience post-pandemic. And when I say the employee experience, what are you offering your employee while they're working? Think about, we talk about customer experience. It's the same thing. What's the employee experience? How do I retain my people by being the best I can be? And it doesn't always have to be money. It could be culture, it could be anything. And you may have to create your culture. You may have to reinvent it. If people haven't been seeing each other for 18 months, you're gonna have to reinvent it. And create a community in your organization, as opposed to always the metrics and productivity. Yes, they're important because you have to make money or you have to provide a service, but also create a community. So you have to address those things so that you're an employer of choice and people don't go elsewhere. Okay, so what can HR do? Well, some quick suggestions. Strategies to hold on to your top talent. Think about it, get a team and decide, how do we hold on to our top talent? You may want to enhance sick time. Instead of always doing exit interviews, you may want to find out and do stay interviews or engagement things. Check in frequently. Leaders should be checking in with their employees. The biggest thing is going to be a greater flexibility in work arrangements, whether it's hybrid, whether it's whatever it is. This one will be key. The other thing is to make sure that you're always providing clear information so that learning can take place. Thanks, Jackie. The next one. And the last thing is managing employees changed forever. It is not going back. So what are the challenges? Some of the challenges are still the same. The rules and regulations are changing, recruitment, employee communication, employee training, compensation, and employee retention. Those are all going to change as we move forward. How they're going to change, we don't know yet. There is no roadmap. But what you need to do as HR people is to remember to address the challenges, but sometimes as HR, we go, these are all our issues. Here's my list. I need to do these 10. My suggestion, my challenge to you is to make sure you prioritize it. What are the key things here? Is it attrition? Is it retention? Is it mental well-being? What is it? And then address it from that perspective. Okay, Jackie, we'll go to the next one. Oops, I'm on discussion points. Oh, discussion point. Oh, yeah, sorry. So some discussion points. So what's really important here is when you bring people back is utilizing technology. So what did you use when you were during COVID? What worked? What didn't work? What do we need to change? And go forward. Also, hyper accelerating changes. I mean, we're pretty good used to change now since COVID because we've had to pivot pretty quickly, but that's not going to change. So I'm encouraging you to continue to do it. Compliance. I mean, I had a client in Ontario says, well, we're going back into the office, so we don't need to do this anymore. And, you know, I had to have a frank discussion and say, what does the public health say? And I pulled it up and let them know that. So it always go to public health, provincial regulations, which changes, and federal. And legislation, I see a lot of changes coming over the next couple of years where some of our employment legislation is rather dated and hopefully will be taken to court and brought up to speed into the real world that we are in now. So excellence is needed in HR now and going forward. So some takeaways for everybody: redefine where people can work, okay? Make that a priority. What are you going to do? Why are you going to do it? And communicate it. Get employee input and then make a plan, make a couple scenarios. If people are leaving, they may not leave now. Some of the research I've read said they're going to be leaving now and in 2 years, from now to a 2-year period. The other thing that's really becoming big is executives have been saying that they're going to do more contract work. So the gig economy for HR and marketing and all that, the gig economy is coming. It's not just for Uber drivers and Uber Eats. So understand that. And HR is changing, and I think it's a good thing, and not all of it is bad. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is pass it over to Jacquie. Thank you, Jacquie, for assisting.
Wow.
Thank you, Margaret. That was an amazing presentation. What we'll do now, and welcome everybody who joined us as we had begun. We had Margaret Braun presenting from her perspective in the HR world. Now we'll segue to our panelists. So we've got Dieter, Helen, and Vivian. And I'm just kind of looking at all three of you. Which one of you has, something burning to add? And what we'll share for the next half hour from the panelists is your response. What's some comments that you want to make? Do you want to add? Do you want to give examples? We can encourage some dialogue back and forth with you and Margaret, or with each other in the panel. So I'm just kind of looking at all three of you. Oh, everyone's hand went up. I saw Helen go first. So go ahead, Helen. Maybe give us a brief introduction of yourself, and then pass it back to me, or call on one of the others to go after you.
Sure, thanks, Jacquie. My name is Helen Ngan-Pare. I'm the Associate Vice President of Human Resources at McEwen University. For those of you who don't know, we're Edmonton's downtown university. We have approximately 20,000 students, and we have about 2,200 staff and faculty here in Edmonton. So some of the things that kind of stood out for me and made me reflect on how we've managed the pandemic and the return. Of course, when it first happened in March of 2020, it was instantaneously we had to take 20,000 students and make them online, because we are not an online university. We are an undergraduate university. McEwen prides itself in the student experience. So small classrooms where professors know students by name, high student involvement in clubs, etc. So it was quite a culture shift, moving everybody online and sending staff home. So, but that was required. Surprisingly, it was able to be done in a very short period of time, like lots of institutions did. And now we're at the state where we're through the pandemic, we have had a hybrid learning model when it was safe to do so, and when restrictions allowed us. We did bring students back in January of this year. We brought about 80% of our classrooms back to in-class learning. So we've had to be quite agile in that, and so our workforce needs to be agile as well. So being a university, of course, in the post-secondary environment, faculty have always had a hybrid work environment, right? They are not your typical 9-to-5 employees where you clock in and clock out. They have always had hybrid. So for us to ask faculty to come back wasn't a huge stretch. With regards to also our learning, McEwen prides itself at being in-person learning. We're not an Athabasca University where it's online, it's in person. And so it wasn't a hard sell to ask our faculty to come back to the model that we had before. The greater challenge, of course, is our other staff. We have staff that support the university, whether it be IT, communications, etc. So that's where we've had some resistance. We've always had some hybrid in some work environments, depending, but having everyone go on 100% and then bringing people back, there is, of course, some resistance. But a few things that was mentioned in the presentation that I think really coincides with us is around that culture piece. So, in our workplace, we strongly believe, because of the student experience, that when students go into a faculty office, they should see a smiling face on the other side and have someone to talk to. That's part of the experience and the culture. So to have a remote workforce for for some of those frontline even though they're administrative positions, it would change the culture, and that wasn't something that McEwen wanted to do. And so that's why in September we've asked our administrative staff to come back to the workplace, and that working from home would now become the exception, not the norm. And it's really built around that culture piece. But then the last thing I want to add too, which has been something our president has spoken about quite publicly, Dr. Annette Trimby, is that McEwen being a downtown university, we have an obligation to help with the economic recovery of businesses downtown, because I don't know if a lot of you have gone downtown. A lot of your favorite restaurants, cafes, whatnot, they're closed. They relied on the vibrancy of people coming into the core. And so being that we have 20,000 students, 2,000 staff that come every day, that feeds the economy around us. And we have a role to play in rebuilding that. And so she's talked a lot about that in terms of why, as one of the reasons of why we need to come back to campus and why we need to build that. So we have that external economy, but we also have an internal economy as well. Of course, on campus, we have parking, we have food services, we have sports and wellness, and we have our own economy. And when everything shut down, those revenue sources for ourselves dried up as well. And so employees tend to spend more money than students do on campus. So we are relying on regenerating that internal economy as well to support our campus activities. So it's kind of a bit of a twofold for us. But the gist of it at the end of the day of why we're asking staff to come back is about culture, workplace culture, in order to support a positive student experience and as well as our role in Edmonton and helping the economy. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Helen. I'm just wondering, do you also, in terms of the HR, are you having internal meetings about what's different about HR? Do you have an HR program where you're teaching HR to the students?
Yep. So yes to both. So we do have a diploma as well as certificate program, and then we have a BCom degree as well. So we do teach HR. In terms of HR in general, yes. Inside HR is supporting our managers as we bring back to the workplace. So we do have a return to campus guide. We have also tools and templates in order to help managers, because there will be cases where people will need accommodations for a variety of reasons. And so of course, we are still allowing flexibility, and those are going to be assessed on an as needed basis and really by job function.
Yeah, it sounds, as Margaret had mentioned as well, we're all learning as we go. So it's nice to hear from others that have gone a little bit before, because how you handle the day-to-day in your HR team may be completely different 18 months later, or maybe it's very much the same. So that again, the HR leaders are going to have to be on top of that. Maybe Vivian, do you want to go next? And then we'll follow up with Dieter. Go ahead, Vivian. Maybe introduce yourself just for a couple sentences.
Sure. Vivianne Bridgeman, President of Stratagem Business Consulting. I'm essentially a consultant, executive coach, 20 years of experience in HR in the North American, Middle Eastern, and Caspian regions. And one of the things I learned working globally was to sometimes do the language barriers, keep it simple and keep it easy to implement. So I've kind of taken that approach when I do HR. One of the things that Margaret said that resonated was when she said minds, hearts, and workplaces, that's all changed. So I kind of look at that and say, how do we create that new sense of belonging? That really stuck out to me, because I think, people are concerned about that. So when I'm visual, and when I see these things, I say, okay, so, looking at, if I'm a small business, what are your company's core strengths? What are you really good at? And draw a tree with branches sticking out, and kind of list out what are the different aspects of your company that makes you unique. So what's really working? What are your employees like? And, doing that in tandem with your employees, including them in that, and really coming up with that new culture. What do we want this to look like as we go forward? And including them in that conversation. I think employees are looking for increased transparency and communication, and they want to be involved, and helping them create that new sense of community, I think could be a really good strategy. And some of the ideas, I was at an HR meeting this morning, and, there was a good analogy that I heard, and it was like, so we talk about diversity, so we invite people to the dance. Inclusion is, okay, we're dancing, but then belonging is really you're playing the music that they want to hear and you're including them in that. So taking that approach forward, some of the strategies I've been working with my clients are, and these are simple things that you can do, doing quick employee pulse surveys, a quick 4 to 5 questions. How are they feeling about things, getting their input, have a culture coalition, and maybe that's employee led. And so maybe there are leaders from the organization, but primarily having your employees kind of help create that culture going forward. Sharing personal stories. I think there was a lot of changes that employees went through throughout the pandemic, and sharing some of those stories can help create that sense of community, because more than likely there's probably a lot of common shared experiences. And if we can come together and talk about that, I think we can kind of go forward. And that is a really positive step. Even having small employee focus groups, even small employee meetings where you can sit down and talk to each other and find out kind of what's really going on, what they want. I think, we talk about an agile workplace. It's not a one size fits all approach anymore. How do we become more adaptable and flexible? And the biggest thing that I found with my clients is ask your employees how they're feeling and what they want. And you can build your strategies from there. Again, like Margaret said, looking at your sick days, looking at your benefits or some of your vacation policies, and having town hall meetings or regular weekly or bi-weekly get-togethers. One of my clients, we have what's called a capstone connect every Friday. So simple things like that don't cost a lot of money, and they can help create community. I could go on and on because this is the topic I love, but I want to turn it over to Dieter so he can have some time to talk as well.
Actually, Dieter, just hold on for 2 seconds. I'll come back to Margaret just for a second in terms, and maybe Vivian, if you want to make a comment on it, to the point of asking the employees what they want. Typically in the past, that was the employee engagement survey that happened once a year, and it took you another 6 to 18 months to implement. So how are you envisioning the future where you need to ask, take action, make change, all on a dime nowadays, not over months or seasons? Maybe Margaret, give us a few of your thoughts on that, and then we'll come back to Vivian.
Well, I think Vivian gave a very good point on doing pulse surveys, and not just on paper, but I think she makes a good point in a discussion group and do them frequently. But I think it needs to be staged that just because employees ask for this, that doesn't mean we can do it. So to put it in a framework of, I'm interested in your feedback, so what would that look like? And then presenting it back to the employees in that respect. Because sometimes from my experience has been is I ask and they go, well, we asked, we're not gonna ask again because you never did it, right? So I think you have to set the stage and set it appropriately. But as far as the annual engagement survey, I think that's gone. It's got to be, I mean, it's too historical. I mean, if we were to do a survey now of what happened since March 2020, what value does that provide us? None, absolutely nothing, right? So my wish is to get it to be more forward thinking as opposed to historical.
100% agree.
Yeah, it's a real pivot to asking the people, taking action. I agree with you in we're going to ask and then we're going to do something about it, or we're going to ask and let you know what our decision is. It may or may not be the same as what you've asked for, but here's the two-way conversation with that, because otherwise people get time. We've been surveyed and over-surveyed, right? But it is, I think, interesting from what you've said, Margaret, that we're listening to the employees. That's a fascinating statistic where, normally we take a look at the top down from the leaders or from the industry, but now we're switching it over to sort of that same idea as customer engagement, employee experience. And the big question is, and how, how and what are you going to do right away? We'll come back to this. We've got lots of questions on that, but let's go over to Dieter, and maybe Dieter add a couple sentences about yourself and whatever else you've heard through the themes so far. And then we'll circle back to the rest of the panel.
Okay, you can hear me okay? Good. Okay, yeah, Dieter Wentzel with McKinsey, and we're a consulting firm here in Edmonton. I bring a human resources aspect to the consulting that we do, a lot of technical assessments on how a company can grow or improve their finances or improve their marketing. But for my focus is specifically people. And what I'm hearing today, very much what I'm hearing as well. The problem with coming last in the panel is all the good stuff's been taken. For example, talking to the employee and trying to create that open dialogue as much as possible is really important. One tripping hazard that I want to acknowledge, though, we're talking about remote, full-time hybrid work. A lot of people have been working from home for a long time. Like I think Claire's been working from home for 35 years, right? So when we go into these dialogues, we have to be a little bit cognizant of what we're talking about. And then on this, talk to your employees and talk to your supervisor. I'm just putting in the chat my experience. So at the time I had 5-year-old twin boys, they're 6 now. We were online for the first time, French immersion kindergarten, and both parents trying to work. So I've got the scratches on that one. It lasted 2 days. I think a lot of parents were going through this, and Helen talked a bit about it. Suddenly everybody's online. Like, what does that mean? Recently, Edmonton's been having some fairly hot weather. You throw on top of that they're potentially don't have air conditioning at home. So you don't have that luxury of going to the office and having a pleasant work environment. So not only are you working on your kitchen table half the day, but then it gets so hot, you go into the basement and you're on some floor. So as you're talking to your employees, those are the questions that you need to include in your weekly or daily check-in as the employee is comfortable. Again, recognizing that essential workers have been, going through this the whole time. I've been doing a lot of work around mental health, men's mental health specifically. But to answer Perry Kincaid's question here in the chat box, a lot of these managers that don't have, or these entrepreneurs or these business owners that don't have an HR manager, and they're looking at employee transition and churn, that open dialogue is unfortunately the simplest, unfortunate, because that's pretty glib statement in some circles, but that open dialogue is where in closing, that's where we have to start, is to make sure that the employees are comfortable and able to talk.
Thanks, Dieter. We'll come back on, you mentioned about 2 or 3 things, so I'm going to pick up on one and then we'll see where the conversation goes. And I'll go back to Margaret, but then maybe the rest of the panel can speak up as well. In the larger organizations, of course, you have an HR team, you have the HR business partner, you have maybe one or many people that are dedicated on helping the leaders to guide those conversations, giving them their own resources and prepping and training and that sort of thing. So in this day and age, with organizations large or small, remote or hybrid, Margaret, what's your recommendation for getting the leaders, getting the bosses ready if they don't happen to have a team that will train them, right? So are the managers just left on their own to figure it out? And presumably we've been living this for 18 months. What's been working?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So I think I'll step back and say, I compliment any business owner, entrepreneur, or organization leader who thinks that I need help. Do you know what I mean? Who actually says, I got to get some help. This is not my areas of expertise. I need to focus on the business, and I need to get someone else to help me focus on the people component. And that's where I was speaking about the gig economy. Well, what I read today, I can't remember which newspaper it was in, but executives are expecting to hire a lot of contract people to help them transition during this time frame. And I think that's great, but it's only great for leaders who say, I need help. Do you know what I mean? I need help. If they don't come forward and get help, then their other leaders won't be getting any help. I mean, I'm finding it with some of my clients is some of the leaders are saying, don't worry about me right now. I have supervisors right now who are scared. They don't know what they're doing and they need help. So, I mean, I compliment them even saying, please help these folks first and then help me next. So that's how I'm looking at it.
I'm going to jump in there, Margaret, because you've expressed a viewpoint that when I was a managing partner in charge of KPMG, I reinforced over and over again that the most powerful words for an executive are not do it, but help. And you've reinforced that in spades, is there is nothing more attractive to an employee to know that their boss has said, I need your input. That is the strongest statement of engagement. When you look at Eisenhower as a general or Churchill as a leader, every one of them had that capacity to convey to the individual that they cared about their situation and that they were willing to listen. This is called personalization. And if there's anything that's echoed through every one of these presentations so far today, it's the circumstances that we're facing today post-COVID are reinforcing this theme of personalization. Now maybe it's driven by the fact that we're scared about limited supply. And when you got limited supply, you pay attention to your individual, your staff. You don't have excessive staff, full confidence that if you leave, big deal, I'm going to hire someone else in your place. We're very nervous about supply today, which reinforces the importance of that individual employee. Do you want to add anything?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Very well said.
It's also, I mean, to reinforce also a point that was made about surveying. I mean, you dismissed, and I think I understand why, the relevance of surveying, but a survey in fact conveys to the employee that you cared enough to even ask. The hospitality industry uses this in spades, even if they don't pay attention to the results. Just asking the question, did you have a satisfactory experience, is enough to say you bothered to ask, therefore you care.
Yeah, and I guess what I was thinking, maybe I didn't express myself well. I'm thinking a just-in-time survey as opposed to a historical one that doesn't provide any value 1 year later. You know what I mean?
I understand. The challenge to me is we can talk about HRM as human resource management, but when I'm an entrepreneur and I'm in a small business, I don't have someone managing HR. It's up to me as an individual. And I think you've reinforced, and maybe the SME actually has an advantage because they are so close to the employees. I mean, you're talking about organizations that have, 5 maybe to 10, maybe 1, maybe 10 staff. They're immersed in this. And I can recall recently read that small businesses are asking the question, can I come to your house and help you redesign your office in order to make it more effective for you and more valuable? That's an extraordinary benefit that an organization extends out to their employees. And
yeah, for sure. And Terry, my experience is from the larger organization that sends out the survey, but it takes so long to see the results and that sort of thing. You're right to point out, like the smaller organizations and people that, you can get everyone in the same room and just ask, that's a better way than trying to use a sophisticated tool that takes too long to get the reports and that sort of thing. The larger the organization, I think, the longer the delay on that. And I'm going to go back to Dieter and let's sort of have some comments in the chat as well. In terms of Dieter, your example of your kids and your 2 working parents. And so just off the top of your head, if someone asked you, what is it that you want in terms of hybrid, maybe give us a couple examples just building on your experience as a parent in the past 18 months. Like what's going to work for you or, personally, or the clients that you work with?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question because we haven't heard the term in this conversation yet about medically fragile. Like the assumption is that everybody's fit and healthy to go to work, but that's not the case at all. Some people have underlying conditions that they haven't disclosed at the office, including mental, not just physical. So how do you broach that subject when you're really flying blind on a lot of topics? One situation that my wife's going through is that the office is starting to reopen, and some people have disclosed that they're not going to get vaccinated, and the other people that have been vaccinated are in this environment, and they're saying, well, how are we going to protect ourselves from potentially, the Delta variant or the Lambda, whatever is coming down the. So to answer your question, it's going back to having those discussions, and as Perry so eloquently said, you have to, as a leader, say, I don't know the answer right now. I don't have the answer. I didn't come here to impose on you a hybrid work relationship or work situation. Let's talk about it and see what's working, and what constraints do you have at home or in your personal life that you're willing to share or disclose that we can try to address. Now, further complicating this is some people don't have an IT infrastructure to accommodate remote. Some people don't have the HR managers. Some people don't have OH&S to help out. So for each client, unfortunately, I guess in a way, each situation is completely different, and that's where HR management is such a broad topic that it's hard to give you one precise remedy to so many factors in a conversation. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No,
but
that's totally, and this goes back to one of the themes that Carrie brings up all the time. We're no longer in a one-size-fits-all market, both employers, employees, industries. And so now we're going to get down to that mass personalization where it is, as you're saying, Dieter, it's different literally from employee to employee. And I agree with you in the sense that we're going to face a bit of a challenge for how much does the employee want to disclose about their personal needs, and vice versa. They're curious about what other people are doing or not doing, right? So I think that's tricky, and that's where you want to really double check with your leaders and your HR people, and that gig economy, I think, is going to be a wealth of knowledge for someone else who has been through it. You don't have to lead the way on your own. Go find someone who already has, and they may only be a day or two ahead of you. I'm gonna go ahead, Dieter.
Yeah, just one other layer of complexity. English as a second language, cultural variance, like religious, like there's so many pieces to this. Just taking a dartboard and throwing the dart and saying we fixed it, that's not the case.
It's a long-term conversation. And I think that was kind of the underlying thing as well. It's nice to hear the success stories from others who have gone ahead, and I liked your term, I forget what you said, tripping hazards, right? The speed bumps and tripping hazards, because something that you might not think is tricky becomes very tricky, and you made a small error that escalates. I see a couple of hands, so if those of you that are in the audience.
Tom here. Tom.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
want to make a comment before we proceed. Just we've talked about in the last several years, organizations becoming flatter and less hierarchical. Means if we pick up on what everybody's talking about, you're not necessarily talking about supervisors in the structure. You're talking about the guy at the top flattening the organization and talking to his employees, whether it be 1 or 1,000, personally. This is a very different type of organization and a very different form of communication, because historically we've talked hierarchically. You talk to the person below you who talks to the person below you. By the time it gets to the person at the front lines, you don't know what the hell is really being conveyed anymore. So today we're talking about really the knowledge-based economy, where people are communicating about knowledge and in that type of structure. We're not talking so much about manual labor. But I think what's COVID has done is forced that flattening of the organization. So you want to know what the guy at the very top has to say, and you want to hear him. You don't want to hear the HR manager. The HR manager is an advisor to the executive, and the executive is speaking his mind about what he believes, because he's the one that's shaping the culture. Margaret, you want to add anything?
No, I think that's perfect. Perfect.
Hey,
and how I relate to that is.
Could I chip in, please? My daughter is involved with a company in Toronto, and it's doing really well, but people would regard it as a startup. And she's got some great managers, and they don't ever lose sight of the necessity to communicate with their employees and find out what's going on and everything like that. The second thing I'd like to talk about is I had, until the recession set in before the pandemic, a company that we did app development. And so we were surrounded by developers and programmers and that sort of thing. And it makes me think that certain industries have certain challenges coming up. Certainly that type of industry is prone to having individuals who go away and work on their own and just complete a task, and then they come back and find out what their next task is, and so on and so on. So it's kind of different industry, and it attracts a different type of person a lot. And these different types of people are prone to want to be on their own, and prone to be, when they're working, just concentrated on their work, and that's not happening. So I talked to a friend of mine this morning. He has a small company with 5 to 6 programmers, and we partner on app development and all that sort of thing. But he was saying that he doesn't want his staff to come back to the office. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And he said that really, he likes the office the way it is, and he's quite happy. And he said that, if I need to expand quickly, I've got these chairs here in this office, and he's got a nice office, that he can very quickly add bodies to his work. So there's certain economics to all of this that I think are really quite interesting. Oh, the other point, one last point, is in the past, the government used to come in and inspect my staff, and you had to have a place in your office with a computer on it, and that place was, a designated employee. If you didn't have that, then they came down on you and you had all sorts of repercussions. Maybe somebody could address that question about what the government's going to do with all of this.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I don't know who can answer that. It is the sort of changing nature where counting your space in the office means you have a desk for everyone and equipment for everyone. But now you have the option to share. We'll take that one just as a comment about, that goes under the headings of regulatory change.
Yeah, I think from my experience every province is different. Yeah, there's different rules in every province, and that's why we really encourage organizations know what the provincial rules are, know what the federal rules are, and know what the public health rules are. I was just dealing with a client in Alberta the other week, and in BC, completely different protocol. So as far as the government's concerned, it's provincial, and then the federal is a little bit higher, but there's not a standard type of thing. And is the government going to step up further? Who knows? Things change so quickly.
I'll just throw.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just throw into there. There is something called a psychologically safe workplace. Mm-hmm. So, these companies aren't functioning independent of, answering what Tom was asking about, a small IT company saying, well, we don't want you to come back, and hope you enjoy your remote experience. There are more pieces to this. And I think as things evolve over the next few months, we're going to see a lot of really interesting reports and insights on that psychologically safe component.
Yeah, you've got your psychological safety plus your sort of disease safety, right? We never had to deal with that before. It was mostly about the interaction, but now you add on the vaccination concerns. And again, I think the underlying theme for all of this is, and people don't know yet, like, you're just going to have to keep on top of that and watch for those success stories and the tripping hazards. Margaret, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think you make a good point, both Jackie and Dieter. And I think to add to that is the legalities. There's a lot of legalities that are coming into play with vaccination, with all kinds of stuff. Employment Standards Act, a lot about compliance, as you mentioned, Jackie. So yes, there's the HR component, there's the psychological, there's it's a very complex issue. It's not simple. And then it's complicated by the legalities part of it.
Let me add a complexity which is associated with the question I just posed to Jackie. I had some experience when I was managing partner with KPMG where we started to work from home. We had a hybrid. This was back in, before 2000. So the hybrid environment is not new. It's just been reinforced and has been exposed to so many organizations, but no, let me share with you a personal experience, because I don't think it was unique. When I went home to participate in work, it messed up the family life significantly, because my income was dependent upon what came over that phone or what came over that computer. So that had priority over family time. And I remember one time my 5-year-old son said to me, "The minister's on the phone." I answered. I came into the house. The minister wasn't on the phone. My son had learned how to get me to supper. Family time is competing with business time when you're working from home. That is a very delicate relationship. And I don't think we spent enough time understanding what the challenges are of learning how to manage work at home when you're in competition with your family and with family time and family interests. I don't think this is subtle at all, but I haven't heard it discussed at all today. And I wonder if anyone wants to pick up on it.
Interesting you say that, because I was talking with some of my HR friends today, and we talk about benefits and taking into that health and wellness. We have, some of the larger companies have, pet insurance and some of this stuff. But what if we thought about, if we look at this hybrid model, childcare options or tutoring services for our children to help with that, working from home and managing that?
What about divorce fees?
That too, right? But I mean, there's ways that we can look at things in a different way that could help our employees, right? And just change up the benefits, change it up a little.
When we asked youth a few years ago, because we spent almost 2, maybe 3 years asking youth about the future of work and what they were worried about, what their anxieties were, because youth have typically been told, get a job that you like and you'll never have to do a day's work in your life, but they're all nervous about AI and whether there will be work as they've understood it or whether they're getting an education that's fitting for the future. One of the, well, even more than the future of work, a higher interest was in mental health. The youth today are attuned through their education to issues of mental health. I'm not quite sure whether that's a good idea or not, but we've certainly reinforced it. And the future of work. What COVID has done is just it's put the dart right smack in the center of the future of work and mental health issues and what you want as an employee, whether you even have a choice. Now, Vivian, when you presented, I wrote down humanism. I mean, your presentation was what the French Revolution was all about, humanism, recognition of the value of the individual to the corporation.
Yeah.
Seems to me that's what this whole message is really all about.
There's another dynamic in here that with regards to the unions and their role, and how they're going to be involved with everything that's going on in the future.
Does anybody have any experience whether the unions are in tune with what we're talking about? Oh, that was silent. Shall we explain what a union is? I know they're on the decline, but
Well, ask Biden what a union is. He figures the unions are still an important part of our economy and do provide education, and they do act as people who can negotiate deals for the employee and so on and so on. So I think that they will be a key element. I'm not saying good or bad.
But interestingly enough, Tom, unions talk about the mass. Unions have not typically been about the individual because the individual sacrifices their individual needs for the mass. That's collectivism. It's conceivable that the environment that we're in of personalization is really a challenge to the union to get the message right.
Oh, I think they're pretty worried right now about what's going on. And I think that there's potential for undermining unions even further.
Anybody
in other provinces.
Have any experience with how unions are responding?
No, because I've been dealing with smaller organizations, right? Yeah. So the unions are still with the big organizations, so they've got clout. I mean, they've always had clout. I mean, and a good purpose. But no, I haven't.
Okay. I can speak to that. Oh,
go ahead, Helen.
So we're a unionized environment. We have 2 unions. We have the Faculty Association, and then of course we have the Supportive Staff Association. And we have actually found, in our case, unions very proactive at working with us. So in our staff association, which is more impacted by this return to work situation than our faculty, how we have found is we engage them and we communicate with them upfront before decisions are made. And so the president and myself meet with the association quite regularly to tell them the heads up, and we ask for their involvement. Can you help us encourage staff to come back, or what are you hearing about concerns, and what kind of calls are you getting? And so they're kind of a bit of helping us with an ear to the ground. And then on the faculty side, it's interesting you bring up the point about, it's a bit about unions kind of look at the masses versus the individuals. So a difference in faculty relations is the associations look in the best interest of the faculty member as opposed to the enterprise. So it's a bit of a different model in a faculty. So they will look at the best interest of what that faculty member wants. And so, but because they've worked in this kind of independent hybrid model to begin with, there hasn't been a lot of resistance in that case. Where we have found perhaps some questioning is around is office, no office, because of course, if you have an office with four walls, the perception is you're safer in a workplace than if you work in an open space. In a lot of our open space environments, you're not sitting 6 feet apart from others, right? So it's been, but I found that if we communicate with them and we involve them in the decision making before it's made, then they're more likely to be on board than not.
I think there's a big opportunity to put the health and safety of the employee first and manage the business, right? So we're all changing our minds on what this business looks like. And I would hope that the unions can step up because we're all in it. You know, like it's not like you can change what's happened. So why not look to the future and step up and be collaborative in a proactive way rather than reactive and slow it down and cause more and more complexity. The underlying theme in all of this is reducing complexity. I have a question. I'm going to just change the topic just for 2 seconds here and invite everybody who's on the line to participate and come back to this question that's been underlying from the person's point of view. So if we did a quick survey of the 20 some odd people that are on the line right now, if you had to say what was the top #1 thing that would help you as you went back into the office, put it in the chat and tell us what, just pick one thing. What one thing would make a difference? Is it different hours? Is it daycare? Is it something to do with your benefits? What might it be? I'm just kind of curious. We'll do a little pop quiz here with the people on the line. And either we'll have a clear theme or we'll show that there's that many different answers to these simple questions. So feel free to put your answer in the chat. Personally, mine would be flexible hours. I want to be able to do a split shift. I'll do early morning and I'll do late at night, and I want my midday to be free. And so the idea that I think it was Margaret that brought up half the day in the office and the half sometime else. That would be very appealing to me. The other thing that would be appealing, there you go, flexibility, paid parking, which we haven't brought up yet directly, but the reduced hours. Right, this whole idea about a 40-hour work week as our full-time work. So this whole idea behind, well, I'd rather have 30 hours, but does that impact my salary? Does that impact my benefits? I want to do my work on the weekend, not the weekday. So all under the heading of flexibility.
One of the clients I'm working with right now is they're not so much tracking hours or having a set schedule. They're starting to set up a managed by outcomes program. So it's less about how much time it takes you to do the job and whether it's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, but more about outcomes. So here's your scope of work. Here's the outcomes we expect. And whatever time you get it done is what the time you get it done. Now, of course, there's got to be some general rules, but they're more focused on the outcome because that to them has a greater impact on their business. Yeah.
I was just going 4 days a week, right, for their businesses. So that's so interesting. I can see all sorts of things like that happening here, where you look at the work that has to be done, and you realize that it can be done in the 4 days a week.
Yeah, and reward them for doing it well, whatever your definition of well done. You have to get really clear with your expectations, and then not worry about managing, time and input. If a person's sitting there because they're watching the clock, that's not the right measure.
No.
I'm going to ask another question to the panel and to Margaret. If an organization, in order for them to survive, we're in this example where we need to be innovative. So all the ideas that have been presented, are we impeding innovation in any kind of way because of the regulations or the restrictions? Can we elevate innovation in a different way? Can anyone give some examples about innovative thinking? We're a group of entrepreneurs here. What's the thoughts on survival and innovation and making changes that stick? Everyone's got their thinking hat on.
So the point here being, and I pose this question to Jacquie, is if there's any theme other than personalization that is endemic to organizations today, given the drive of technology and the socio-demographics that are going on in the world at large. It's the necessity to be innovative. Is this work from home, is this breaking up of the organizational structure where people are not necessarily working together physically, but are working in isolation from home? Is this impeding the organization's capacity to be innovative? If so, we got a problem.
Yeah. Everyone.
I just really enjoy, in the last week or two, I've had meetings with people, and we sit and eyeball each other and talk about what we're going to do next. And I'll tell you, we can certainly go off and hide ourselves at home, but those meetings just become so enjoyable, you know, so wonderful. And I keep thinking, okay, yeah, I just want to get back to meeting people again, talking to people.
But I mean, isn't that what Zoom is allowing? I mean, or
It's not the same.
It's
We
not the same.
communicate in so many ways other than through a two-dimensional screen. You know, it just is. You sit there and you say, "Well, what about this? What about that? What about there? Yeah, and all that stuff." And
Well,
I
think it goes under the heading.
we're social beings, right?
Yeah, and innovation happens. It's not like we're going to be innovative at the 2 o'clock meeting on Tuesday. It has to be spontaneous, because someone says something, someone has an idea, they grab the other guy, and you're all there. And that was one of the points that Margaret had for sure. Really optimizing that face time and being able to have that dialogue, have the conversations. The interaction in person is more effective for certain types of conversations. If you're just doing an update report, well, that could be a Zoom. But if you're doing we're solving this complex problem, it's probably face to face. You might have to say, okay, that's Tuesday when everyone should be in the office for the half day that we're all trying to be in the office, and people need to value that. Olga's been waiting for a question here, so let's go to Olga and see what she has to say. Go ahead, Olga.
Thank you. I can tie in a little bit the innovation question and the unions question that kind of fell flat previously, because I would think that unions are at a disadvantage in responding to COVID and hybrid work and all the other things that need to come up right now, because they only really have their bargaining times to force major influence onto their employers or to recommend major changes. So how can, and that's typically every 2 years or so. So how can we either help unions bring in new innovations, or I guess that's pretty much it. Mm-hmm. Like, what can we do as employers, or what can we do as advisors to unions or whatever, to help them stay with the times instead of being always the ones chasing the change that the employers recommend?
See, Olga, you've touched on something that I think is fundamental and goes even beyond COVID. I mean, if we are in a world of rapid change, then any organization that's been built on maintaining status quo is going to have a problem. So how do we help unions become flexible based on personal requirements and based on the organization's need for continuous change? And that isn't just unions, that's government as well. I mean, we're touching with this COVID discussion what people talk about advancing or accelerating change. That is going to be the challenge to any, quote, organization that's been built in maintaining status quo. And that includes HRM. I mean, what I heard from Margaret is incredible adaptiveness, and Helen as well, and the rest of you, Vivian, is the need for organizations to realize it's not maintaining the status quo that is the future. It's building an organization that is adaptive and ready to change in the face of innovation, in the face of things like COVID. That's a beautiful statement. That's the arrival of the French Revolution and humanism, is a recognition that human beings thrive on change because that's continuous learning. This is a beautiful discovery. That it isn't about status quo and maintaining routine. It's about being adaptive to the need to adapt readily. And that's not what organizations have historically been built to do. They've typically been built to maintain status quo.
Well, and I'll add to that, Perry, the need to listen. Just like in the past, we listened to the market, right? The consumer is going to buy or not buy. And if you are producing things that nobody buys, then soon you go out of business. So now we add, and same with the employees, and possibly same with your leaders, right? So the juggling act of all of this listening will, as Margaret said so well, we're going to have to prioritize. We will listen and then we'll make some decisions. And if that means that the workforce changes, as some of those stats are showing, I think, although people will say right now, yes, I will they really when it happens and when the rubber hits the road? But that's what we're watching over the next 6 to 18 months. Are all these predictions, which ones of these predictions are going to come true?
Well, if there's any organization on this earth that has had more challenges in the face of COVID by way of example, and that is being able to adapt readily, it's governments. This has been a challenge and a test of government's capability to recognize individual impact by coming up with policies and regulations and principles and approaches that will meet the needs of an individual and yet help a society. This has been phenomenally exciting for those of us that have lived through it. And I think that will be the reflection of what COVID really meant. It was a test of our institutional capability to meet the needs of individuals in a global phenomenon. And maybe climate change will be another one.
You know what, and Perry, what you're saying is making me think about the point that Helen brought up. So maybe Helen will come back to you. For your president to say that it's the responsibility of the Grant MacEwan University to be part of the downtown economy, right? Like, so that you're not just only balancing the needs of your employees and your leaders, and it's your duty to the community in whatever capacity that might be. And so, I don't know, Helen, I'll put you on the spot. If you had to prioritize of all the 3 or 4 different groups that we're mentioning, where would you put the responsibility to the community in that hierarchy of priorities?
Well, you know, I think in our circumstance, I would say it's kind of number 2. So number 1 is a priority to who our client is, which is the students. So the student experience is, you know, a big priority. But then of course, number 2 is that this belief of a responsibility to the community has driven a lot of our recent priorities and decision making and consultation that we have. We don't operate independently of those around us and those businesses. If the government is asking post-secondaries to create more linkages between students and graduation and employment, so we need to rely on that community to hire our students. And so if we're a good corporate citizen as an institution and contribute to the community, then I think the goal is that will pay back for our students in some ways in the end. And then thirdly, of course, is individual preferences. And when we started with this COVID situation, we had some principles on how we made decisions. And one of them was operational needs are how we make decisions, and individual preferences are considered, and in that order, right? So what do we need to operate and what is important to us? And so, you know, I think from the employee perspective, if you look at some of the stats that, of course, Margaret showed there, it's from the employee perspective of, you know, wanting this, wanting that, etc. But from an operational and a management perspective, we can't give that all, right? Because we're here to serve. You know, we have a service to provide and we have a community to serve. And so as a result, it sometimes means employee needs are not what drives our decision making. So.
Well, I mean, that poses a question. How far can you go? We've reinforced the relevance of personalization, but let's be honest about it. In an organization, there are certain limits as to how far you can go. And therein lies what a manager is really all about, is how to balance the two. What a challenge.
But I think there's a lot of tools out there to help you, and a lot of, you know, I think Dieter referred to it earlier around accommodation for medical reasons. We, you know, since we made the announcement that we're asking people to return, those requests for accommodations have been coming in because people have valid reasons why, whether they're immunocompromised, you know, vaccination or not, or they live with somebody, you know, there's reasons why people do need accommodation for a variety of reasons. And I think those types of things, you know, were always part of the workplace, and I don't see them as individualization requests. I think it's part of our duty to accommodate in those situations. But I think COVID brought out, it's not just the individual's medical condition, it's now these other factors, you know, childcare. If you have a child that's being compromised, they can't go to, you know, so there's all these other factors that we now need to look at that I don't think we wouldn't have thought of this 18 months ago on these other various things, right?
And I think also when we talk about the accommodation, I think we saw some disparities with, you know, between women and men in terms of who's taking care of the children, who's managing the household, how do we deal with this going forward, childcare needs. And so really that became a challenge. And I'm curious to see how that kind of goes as we move forward, how we balance that, right?
I mean, how many organizations considered family dynamics?
Yeah.
Looking at my daughter, I just see so much more flexibility in her job. You know, she's a VP of HR for this company in Toronto. She balances that with 2 kids and a husband who's got a good job with the province. But, you know, the way they're able to bounce these kids around and manage them and get their schooling done and all this stuff at the same time as they're both holding down these difficult jobs, you know, it just amazes me. I just can't imagine how hard it must be.
And they'll look back 10 years from now and say, I don't know how I did it, but we just did it. We don't have time to think about it.
Yeah, we lived in a sod hut, right?
Yeah. The other, I'm just watching in the chat, Ling had made a point about driving everyone to a common goal and just double checking that you're all focused. And I think that, again, from the business point of view, what's our core business? What's our core principles around getting the work done? How are we measuring success? All is up for grabs nowadays. And again, not to say that it's all people all times, because many people have already been doing this for 10 years. I worked from home 10 years ago, right? So it's not such a surprise, but it may be a surprise to you and your team. But there are people out there that have done this before. And so it's just a matter of, as Perry's saying, is like, what's the innovation? Let's be nimble. Let's think outside the box, to use a phrase. And it's not that you're reinventing the wheel, because there's many other solutions out and about. It's just a matter of asking for help, as Margaret has said, and just taking a look. Dieter, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, my last comment is, in the presentation, I heard the phrasing something to the effect of when COVID is over, when the coronavirus is gone. And we're starting to hear about booster shots for people that got vaccinated in January. And we're starting to hear about monkeypox. I didn't know monkeypox was a thing, but now that's the new thing. I think these decisions have to have a bit of long view, a bit of perception that some of these restrictions might come back into place. So as these entrepreneurs and business owners are going forward, that nimble, you know, approach, you might have to go back to the restrictions. So as people are slowly coming back to work, it's like 2 pieces of Velcro, right? Like how much are we going to connect, and how much are we going to say, let's keep something in our back pocket in case the next wave, the next pandemic, the next illness starts to come through.
There's another level to this that we haven't touched on, and I know we've only got a few more minutes, but there may be some comments worthy of sharing here. If in fact we have difficulty bringing the workforce back, and I think some of the statistics that Margaret presented indicate that this is a serious issue, and it's reflected in the media and the those that control finance in Canada and in the United States, that if we can't get the workforce back that we had before, although they say that the US is within 4% of the peak and Canada is within 1.8%. But if in fact we can't get the workforce back, and then we start using benefits of increasing salaries, which then reflect on pricing, then we face inflation. Now they're saying that we can probably handle 2-3% inflation. Those are the targets. But if we hit a serious issue of not being able to bring the workforce back, and that triggers inflation, we got another major problem in front of us. And Margaret, I think you were the only one that used the word inflation in your presentation. So maybe you've given some thought to this, but this is probably beyond most of us because it reflects on economic policy at a national level. But inflation could seriously hurt all of us. So it's in a way up to HRM to try and mediate the impact of inflation by ensuring that we can get our workforce back.
Or a depression, eh? Or a depression.
It's up to the business owner to plan ahead.
Go ahead, Lang.
It's up to the business owner to plan ahead, to see ahead and plan ahead. We already plan ahead. So starting this week, for the last little while, we've been talking to international partners, taking our operation internationally. So that's how you mitigate.
Okay, well, we're into wrap up time. Jackie,
Yeah, go ahead, Perry. Give us your last final words.
Okay, well, I mean, I thank you, Jackie and Margaret and Helen and Vivian and Dieter for allowing me to interject here and there. I do so because of my enthusiasm. But I think you've reinforced that theme that has been with us now for some time of personalization, and how organizations under COVID and probably well into the future faced with the challenges of innovation, which are almost like COVID, asking the organization to adapt and continue to adapt. But the answer has been around personalization. How do you get the most out of your employees in a manner that makes them satisfied? Pretty simple, eh? You give more money? Well, that's not what Hertzberg found. Hertzberg found, and it's been repeated over and over again, that the most valuable offering that any organization can give to an individual is the relationship they have with their supervisor. Because the supervisor is the individual that should know them well. And I remember a theme of he who knows his customer best has no competition. Well, he who in the HR business knows their employee best has no competition. So therein lies probably a message for all of us is know your employees, know your customer, know your suppliers. It's the relational skills that will ultimately allow you to survive and succeed in commerce, because commerce is really a social interaction between people. It's that simple. It's not what the banks do or your investor. It's what you are doing with your employees, with your staff, with your suppliers, with the people who you, quote, should care about. I think it's that simple. Sharon, you want to add anything?
I think you're spot on there, Perry. It's possible that the pandemic repositioned the importance of the employees to the leadership teams. And if metrics were the only single metric, or pardon me, the financials were the only single metric that a corporation or an organization looked at in terms of success or measurement of success. If they ignored their employees as their premier stakeholder group, then I think they're not going to be satisfying what any of our HR leaders have said today in this room, which is to consider them at the top of the list, equally as important as your customer relationship in the private sector, as you've talked about. So yeah.
Well, it is wrap up time. And I personally want to thank Jackie for moderating what was really wide ranging. I mean, I got 5 pages of notes and usually it's just a couple. So Jackie, you've done a sterling job in moderating. Margaret, your launch and your introduction was comprehensive, highly analytical and very, very helpful. Vivian, you're a humanist from beginning to end. I was really delighted to hear what you had to say. Helen, obviously McEwen is adapting, and if most organizations were doing what you're doing, we'd be in great shape. And Dieter, I think you understand the SME, the small business environment, and the need to individualize their behavior. So I thank all of you for attending. I look forward to maybe seeing you in the future. Our next moderated session will probably be in August on entrepreneurship. And we're looking at a workshop or a webinar in September on personalized medicine, which Randy Duguay will got to be front and center on that one. So good night, stay cool for those under the heat wave or the heat dome. And I thank all of you for joining us today. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.